All right, welcome to the other side. Justin, our intro music just left me. Can you hear me all right?
I got you loud and clear.
Okay, so we're gonna have to go without the intro music this morning if or this evening if that's gonna be all right with you.
Hey, that works. You roll with it.
Okay, contact information for the show, facebook.com/TOS podcast at TOS underscore podcast on Twitter, or individually, you can find us at Justin Spears 4 or at Mr. Margison. Online, we're on the Cerberus Radio Network. A lot of good programming on there. Renegade and Rambler, Wasatch Report. Highly encourage you to go and give that a listen. You can find us on the radio, WCVL 92.1 FM, 1550 AM. We're playing on Saturday mornings there at 8 a.m. You can also listen online, WCVLAM.com. There's always the old fail-safe email, Margison and Spears at gmail.com. Welcome, everybody, to the other side. And tonight we're going to talk about something that you're really not allowed to talk about. That's race. Well, okay, you're allowed to talk about it, but there's a very narrow pathway that you have to stay on. There's basically one opinion that you're allowed to have, and that has been dictated to us by, well, leftist media and academia types. But if you deviate from that path at all, you're called all sorts of names. And this being the other side, we're going to stray away from the allowable path, I guess. And we're going to be a little bit combative tonight. And luckily, I'm joined by one of the most combative, aggressive, belligerent people I know, Justin Spears. Justin, how's it going?
I'm doing well, Mike. I'm doing really well. Yeah, I've mustered up every ounce of energy that I have to come across as overly combatant and aggressive.
Anybody listening to this who knows Justin knows that I'm just kidding. He's like a kitten. He's like a 6'4" kitten. All kidding aside, this conversation about race has really been monopolized by militant leftists to the point where nobody even challenges them anymore because they don't want to be accused of being a neo-Nazi. And the end result is that there is no real dialogue concerning race. There's just bullying. It's like, challenge my point of view and I will get you fired. We've actually seen that. And look, you can't say that you desire a post-racial society and then obsess over race. That's inconsistent. And that's really what we have now. We have obsession over race, an unhealthy obsession. Every policy, every election, every statistic is viewed and discussed seemingly only in terms of its impact on different races. And why? I mean, are race relations that bad? I'm wondering, like, what if you polled people? I think that if you polled people, they would probably say that race relations are at an all-time bad, the worst ever. But then if you asked them if in their own individual experiences, if they saw that, they would say no. So is it true that race relations are bad? One of the things that struck me, well, one of the things that I was thinking about when we were putting together information for this show was, how did Americans act after Hurricane Harvey hit Houston or when Hurricane Irma hit? Did they care about race? I mean, did anybody consider people's skin color when they flocked out there to help? No, of course not. I think that everyday Americans generally get along, but we're told that we hate each other. And this is not productive, and we need to change course. But unfortunately, it's also not new. This is really the end result of more than 2 decades of using race for political advancement, and it's counterproductive. When I was in college, so this would have been, though, the mid 90s, I went to college in California, so it's a pretty liberal state, and I was at a pretty liberal college, and I was a political science major. But the two major issues of the day then were welfare reform and affirmative action. And I specifically remember, so with respect to welfare reform, we would talk about it in class all the time. I think it was 96 when that bill was passed, so that would have been about right. But we would talk about it in class. And the way it was discussed, I mean, I was on an island, so I didn't talk a whole lot. But the way it was discussed was, if you were opposed to welfare reform, well, welfare recipients were not overwhelmingly African American, but as a percentage of the population, you were much more likely to be on welfare if you were African American than if you were white. So, in terms of welfare reform, if you opposed it, it had this reform would have a disparate impact on the Black community. So, if you opposed it, then you favored something that would adversely affect the Black community, and therefore you were racist. And when I remember people talking about this, I just wanted to almost muster up the courage to speak up and say, no, you guys, you don't understand. I gave them too much credit. I would say, no, if I could just explain to them and say, no, I'm not coming from a position of racial hatred at all. It's just that I think that the short-term gains, whatever they may be from welfare, are outweighed by the long-term costs. I don't think it's a beneficial program. And I just felt this need that if I could just explain myself to them, then maybe they would understand. And it's the same for the other issue, affirmative action. There was a ballot measure in California around that time. I think it was 95 or 96. It was called Proposition 209. And what that sought to do was eliminate race-based preferences in public institutions. So colleges and government jobs, you wouldn't be able to consider race in your as a deciding factor. And this, of course, would render affirmative action meaningless. You wouldn't be able to use it. And so, of course, on the left, people were up in arms and going crazy. And I was walking through campus one day, and there was a anti-Prop 209 rally, and somebody handed me a flyer as I was walking by, and I continued walking, and I was reading it, and there was a picture of a Klansman burning a cross on it. And at the top of the flyer, it said, the KKK supports Prop 209. And at the bottom, it said, do you? ? And again, I remember thinking, well, no, if I could just go back and explain to this person, no, I don't support Prop 209 because I want to, burn crosses on Black people's lawns. I just don't think that race should be a consideration when determining college admissions or, readiness for a job or anything like that. And again, I felt the need to, if I could just explain it to them, they would understand. But then eventually, as you mature and you see this happening over and over again, you realize it's not about race at all. It's about politics, and race is the vehicle. And where are we today? It's no different. I mean, really, the only difference that I've seen is it's been rebranded as white supremacy because the term racist doesn't have any effect anymore. And people were warning of that back at the time. If you oppose every policy thrown out there and by calling people racist, then eventually the term racism is not going to mean anything. The term racist is not going to mean anything. And that's kind of where we are today. I mean, if somebody calls you a racist, it's like, it's nothing. It has no meaning anymore. So they've had to go to something a little bit more forceful. And now it's, we tend to hear white supremacist much more than racist. I was able to gather up, I got a few examples of how, racism, white supremacy, whatever you want to call it, is used as a tactic to kind of further a political agenda here. And this is all from just within probably the last few months. And I'll start with this one. This is a group called Ultraviolet. It is a progressive group, an activist group, but it's big in numbers. I mean, we're talking in the tens of thousands. But Ultraviolet said that drinking Starbucks contributes to white supremacy. Do you drink Starbucks, by the way, Justin? I'm not asking you if you're a white supremacist. I'm just curious.
I do enjoy a little Starbucks from time to time.
Okay, so you are a white supremacist. Well,
part-time supremacist.
Part-time supremacist. Okay. Well, so according to Ultraviolet, this contributes to white supremacy. And why? It's because a couple of the, I think, almost 25,000 Starbucks locations worldwide, a couple of them are located on properties that Donald Trump happens to own. So if you go to Starbucks, even here in Indiana, you are contributing to white supremacy. Now, is that really a healthy contribution to discussions on race relations in this country?
Of course not. And you know what it reminds me of too, just as a quick sidebar, is the people who yammer on and on about working conditions and pay and everything like that, but yet they buy Nike brand, manufactured in a sweatshop somewhere, or support Apple products that are built in, manufactured over in China in really horrible working conditions as well. And it just, it's kind of the hypocrisy stuff, but you're right on.
Yeah, and it's it's if we do aspire to reach something with respect to race in this country, calling people who go to Starbucks white supremacists is really, I don't think is going to help. All right, this goes back to the actual national anthem fiasco. We did an episode of it over this in September, but Huffington Post contributor Jesse Ben concluded that if you stand for the national anthem, you're a white supremacist. Now, pay attention to what he's saying here. This isn't, if you don't support the kneelers or if you think that they're unpatriotic or whatever. Now he's saying that if you do what 99% of Americans do, which is actually stand for the national anthem when it's played, then you too are a white supremacist. Again, are we moving the needle on race here when you're saying stupid stuff like this? Max Booth, the Los Angeles Times, this is more recently, if you support the tax cuts, you're racist. Why? These are his words, not mine. He says, this is not an a la carte presidency. It's a fixed menu, all or nothing. If you want the tax cuts and the judges, you've also signed up for the racism, the misogyny, the immorality, the lawlessness, the deranged tweets, possibly even something close to treason. Trump supporters own it all. Now, forget the fact that that is one of the stupidest things I've ever read. Like, you can't say, I support this person on this position, but not on this position. To suggest that if you support these tax cuts, which I'm pretty sure tax cuts are colorblind, you're a white supremacist. That's ridiculous. But, stuff like that, I can just choose not to, go to Ultraviolet's website or read the Huffington Post or read the LA Times, which I don't. But when it's going to start moving its way into areas that do affect me. And so now it starts moving its way into academia too. I found something here this was again this fall, Diablo Valley College, a professor telling his class that they must destroy the foundations of the United States, namely the Constitution, because it was built on laws created by white men. Now, what's not important here is what these laws say, the ideas of liberty, the ideas of natural rights. It's the fact that the color of the skin of the people who wrote them, that's what matters to this person. This Albert Ponce is his name. And so he says here, we need to abolish it. And in his words, he says, what does abolition mean? It means we must destroy it, not reform it. No voting is going to help. No writing your congressperson. We need to smash white supremacy. He wants a complete overthrow of the United States. And if you don't do that, you are complicit in white supremacy here. Cal State University Long Beach staff writer Samantha Diaz, she claims that milk is the new symbol of hate in America. This one actually made me laugh. Her proof was that white Nazis and white nationalists use milk as a form of racial supremacy. She goes on to say that you, along with the rest of the nation, have been so accustomed to hearing the benefits of milk that you probably didn't even realize the subtle racism hidden in our health facts, Diaz writes. Now, what in the world is she talking about? She's saying that blacks are not affected by osteoporosis, like white Americans. These are her words. In other words, the stronger bones rhetoric, I'm putting that in quotes, her words, is meant for a white audience, not a black audience. The article also stated milk is non-beneficial to Africans, that's her words, and could be detrimental to their health, end quote. And of course, nothing was given to substantiate that claim. Lastly here, you've probably heard of the famous Michigan State professors. We kind of teased this a little bit, who claim that yoga is white supremacy. They said that these are their words, to so many of the white people who practice yoga, please don't stop. Please do take a moment to look outside of yourself and understand how the history of yoga practice in the United States is intimately linked to some of the larger forces of white supremacy. This, again, I mean, this is so idiotic. And if we are looking to move forward in terms of race relations, this is doing the opposite. It's simply bringing us back. But this last portion is where I draw the line. And I'm just going to touch on this, and then I'm going to kick it over to you, Justin. But this was something that happened in a school district in Minnesota. It was the Edina Community School District, and there was a K-12 program put into place that focuses solely on social justice. They implemented this in 2013. The Edina school leaders adopted what they called the All for All strategic plan, and it was a sweeping initiative that rendered the district's mission from academic excellence, and it used to be an academically excellent district, to, quote, racial equity. In other words, they're putting racial equity first, right in front of academic learning. Everything is going to be viewed through the lens of racial equity. All right, it says here the All for All plan mandated that henceforth, quote, all teaching and learning experiences would be viewed through the lens of racial equity. And what really struck me here was that they started with the kindergarten students. And they have kindergarten students tracing their hands. This is what they call the Melanin Project. Kindergarten students trace their hands and they color them to reflect their skin tone, and then place the cutouts on a poster reading, "Stop thinking your skin color is better than anyone else's!" Exclamation point. "Everyone is special!" Exclamation point. Now, I don't have anything wrong with that message per se, except for the fact that what kindergartner actually thinks that their skin color is better than somebody else's? I mean, aren't we a little bit too young for this? I think it's just, look, let me conclude here. I know I'm going to be reflexively called whatever, a racist for deviating from the allowable dialogue, but let's be clear. I am doing this because I think it's deteriorating our social fabric. I think it's pulling us apart, not bringing us together. And when it starts with our kids, I've got a major problem with it. I think organically, not only kids, but all people, I think that races get along until we're told that we don't. And that's when tensions rise. And this is where I want to start to move it over to you, Justin. So I've showed here that they are trying to, they're using academia to move the needle on this subject. But we also see this in legislation. Right? Legislators look at something like race relations, and then they say, okay, well, we got to legislate this to get it to a point where we want it to be. Is that the right move? Can we make progress with legislation?
In a nutshell, no, we can't. You cannot legislate morality, and I think that's something that I've tried to discuss with people that talk about whether it's this thing with the gun control or abortion or the death penalty or gay rights or whatever these societal topics are that we're talking about. You cannot legislate the evil out of somebody's heart. And I think that's a really important aspect to focus on here with this topic. And what I want to do here is I want to read for you and the listeners just some excerpts from a piece that was written by the Attorney General in the state of Indiana, a gentleman by the name of Curtis Hill, who, by the way, happens to be Black. And basically, he wrote this opinion piece after a piece of legislation failed in the state of Indiana, and just the state legislature got ripped by the local paper, the Indianapolis Star, which, by the way, is just an absolute, I won't even go down that path, but they basically came out and said that, the Republican-led legislature is cowards for not passing this hate crimes legislation. And so Attorney General Hill comes out and writes a piece talking about the idea of not legislating thought and drawing the line between thought and action, which is a very important, component to, again, talking about race, racism, and white supremacy. So I kind of want to start off with him talking a little bit about defining hate and going through a little bit of this kicking around in the mind of what the role of government is here. He says, as Shakespeare said, what's in a name? No matter what you call it, hate is a horrible thing. Unquestionably, we need less of it. But is it something we should legislate? Hate is an emotion, a belief, a thought. Although we can agree that hate is wrong and should be roundly discouraged, it has not been our nation's practice to criminalize thought. So I want to stop there for a second. And if we are to agree for a second that legislation is not the appropriate way to handle this, how do we handle it? And just as a quick insertion here, I would say, as I have said with a lot of things that we talk about on this podcast and in my philosophical and political beliefs, is we deal with this as people, as communities, as neighborhoods, as cities, as towns, as states. We come together and work with each other through individual or group associations that we're a part of. And we weed out the evil. Evil is only allowed to exist because people allow it to exist, right? It's the old quote about it only takes, people, good man do nothing. I forget the exact quote. I think it was Churchill that he was talking about that with Hitler, is to just sit aside and do nothing. And so when you hear and see these types of things, we have a responsibility and duty to shut that down, and not in a derogatory manner. I think that's the thing that dialogue and debate and discussion has boiled down to, is scoring points over somebody. So if you hear somebody crack a racist joke, or you see somebody take an action, whether it's something as silly as like dressing up in blackface, or, pretending that they've got a sheet over their head or something like that, it's our responsibility and duty to shut that nonsense down and educate that person. Don't try to shame them. Don't try to, because they're just going to push back harder that way. Yes, you want to make it clear in a way that is productive that, hey, that's not acceptable. That is not something that we want to aspire to in this community, in this organization, in this city, whatever it is. But then educate that person. That's the step that is so grossly missing in this equation, is to get people educated on these topics so that they understand that what they're doing is wrong. And now they may shut you down. They may not want to listen to you. They may be, pig-headed enough that they're going to believe what they want to believe. And at some point, just like you can't legislate morality, you can't, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. And so it's the same thing. But as long as we're doing our due diligence and bringing these people along and letting them know that what they're doing is wrong, I think that's how we accomplish this. And so Attorney General Hill goes on here, and I'm going to skip ahead here in the article, where he talks a little bit more about the idea of why hate legislation is wrong fundamentally. And I think this is so vitally important, because this gets right back to the heart of what you were just talking about, with all of those different activities and participation things that people do that get somebody labeled, as idiotic as they are, as a white supremacist or a racist. And what he's doing here is he's talking about what this message this sends when we create this hate crimes legislation. You talk there at the end about kindergartners and seeing their skin color. What we're doing is we're planting the seeds. We're dividing. We're teaching kids to see skin color first, and to see, oh, those people are different than me. That's a different group of people, right? Now,
they don't organically see that.
Correct, right. And at some point that may happen, and there again, that's where it's important for us as parents, as leaders in the community, to insert, hey, look, that's not what this is about. When you hear kids that start to identify differences, whether they be based on skin color or socioeconomic or religious or anything like that, it's our duty and responsibility to educate that child and to help bring them up and understand that, no, that doesn't make them any better or worse than who you are as a human being. Okay. And so I want to pick this up here. He says, but should some groups receive greater protection from hateful conduct than others? Which is a great question, right? It's something that doesn't even get discussed or talked about. Designating specific groups to be protected necessarily implies the existence of other groups that are not. Although one might argue that certain groups merit protection over others, this argument oddly contradicts the very essence of equality that such protection is intended to ensure. And this is where he really hits the nail on the head here. The protected class of race was established to guard against discriminatory practices that historically impacted Blacks. But discriminating against someone solely because they are white is just as much a violation of the protected class of race, regardless that whites have not been determined to be the victims of long-term patterns of discrimination. And that gets to the crux of this issue, right? There is nothing that the white people in this country today can do because of our past that will appease or get people to not see us as racist or white supremacists. I mean, by God, you just listed a bunch of idiotic activities that will get one labeled as a white supremacist. So if you're in that mindset there, right, you're automatically seeing things like what we're talking about now, or things along that nature, as being infinitely worse than that. Whether you drink Starbucks or do yoga or whatever it might be. And so he's saying here that creation of groups in society is detrimental because it divides us. B, by doing that, you're therefore saying that one group gets protection and another doesn't. And then he goes even further in C to say that just because the group that you're looking to protect yourself against may in your history have been the one that has perpetuated a lot of the issues, that doesn't necessarily mean that you now have a legislative hammer that you can come down on that group and put them back down to size and cut them down and have them now be victims of discrimination and hate crimes and things of this nature. And again, I want to remind the listener, this is coming from a Black man who happens to be the Attorney General of the state of Indiana. So this is not Justin Spears saying this, okay? And I know the unfortunate thing, I think that a lot of people that would hear this would say is, oh, well, he's just a token. He's just a token Black, just the same way that they do with Thomas Sowell and Walter Williams and Ben Carson and all these other great, great influential Black American minds that have so much to offer to this country, that if people would listen more and care more about what they say and back away from what people like Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton and the race hustlers have to say, I think minds would be open and people would see a little bit clearer side to this.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. And as I kind of think about what you were saying there, and then thinking about my own experiences, think about the hundreds of millions of interactions that occur between people every day. Just innocuous interactions that we don't even think about. I mean, hundreds of millions. That's not even like billions and billions of interactions between Americans every day. And they are generally, overwhelmingly, almost always peaceful and good-natured. I mean, this is what I think America actually is. It's not what the media and the academia drive into our heads and try and convince us that America is, as they try to push a political agenda.
No, absolutely. Well said. Well said.
All right. I think that's going to conclude our session for our radio listeners, those listening on WCVLAM.com or 92.1 FM, 1550 AM. If you want to continue listening, we are still going to be live on YouTube. For our radio listeners, we are going to be coming back next Saturday talking a little bit of economics. So thank you very much for joining us, and we will see you next week. All right, Justin, I want to go back to Edina a little bit. And you used a phrase that I thought was pretty powerful, and it's actually stuck with me since I brought you this article. When I brought this to you, you brought it back to my room and you said, this is psychological abuse. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, I think what was kind of running through my mind as I was reading that piece, and I would encourage listeners, you can run probably a quick Google search on Edina, Minnesota school districts to probably find this article.
Yeah, it's Edina. That's Edina, Minnesota. And just look up Edina, Minnesota social justice, and it'll come right up. So anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, no, good call. As I was reading this, I was trying to put myself in the position of being, either an educator or a student in this school district. And I think the abuse part came from reading some of the accounts of people who were looking at this and saying to themselves or to groups in the school corporation or in the community that this is wrong, and they were being shut down. That not just shut down, minimized, they were being mocked, they were being ridiculed. So that's where the abuse part kind of came in. And of course, obviously, there wasn't any accounts of physical confrontations with this. So that's where I kind of came in with the psychological part, because it was breaking somebody down for something that they had no part in doing, something that they have not done anything other than be who they are. And to take somebody like that and subject them through the force of the public school system. It's not like these kids can say, I want to go to this school. You're going to these schools compulsory, and you have to sit here and take this, and you're on an island. You're ostracized, you're beat down, you're ridiculed, you're mocked, you're told that your thoughts are wrong. There's no room for anyone to be able to insert anything other than what the school district has pushed through this curriculum. And it really infuriated me. It upset me to the point where I was like, if my kid were in this school district and I had caught wind of this, I would have had a choice. I'd have to go work a second, third job. I'd do whatever I had to do. They would be out of that school district in a heartbeat.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no question. In fact, I was reading here in the story. One of the things that struck me was Orlando Flores and his wife. They did pull their son, who was an academic superstar by all accounts, out of Edina High School during his senior year to escape this environment. And the Flores, they actually fled a Marxist regime in Nicaragua as a child. And they had this to say. They said, quote, "Years ago, we fled communism to escape indoctrination, absolutist thinking, and restrictions on our freedom of speech. If we see these traits in our schools in America, we have to speak out and oppose it." And it's unbelievable. I mean, I know that these militant leftists don't see it this way, but this is, I mean, it's no different than this communist totalitarianism.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I just think that when we look at solutions, I think you were doing a really great job of hitting this up there toward the end of your opening segment. Is when we're looking for solutions to moving forward in our country, this kind of thing is beyond counterproductive. It actually serves to plant the seeds into people's minds that, listen, if it's going to be turned into an us versus them, what do you expect me to do? Do you think I'm really going to just, cut loose of everything that I know and say, okay, you're right. My way of life is wrong. My heritage is wrong. My culture is wrong. Everything about me based on how I was born in this world is wrong. I'm going to leave that all behind and take up the cause? Or are you going to solidify and calcify your position and move more radical? And that's what I think the end result is going to be with things like this.
You're exactly right. It's divisive. It does not bring people together. It does the opposite. And one last thing that I want to touch on with Adina before we move into our kind of closing segment here is you can only do it's simple opportunity cost when it comes to this. It's a simple economic concept. So if you focus here on social justice, what are you giving up? And in this case, they've been giving up literacy and math. We see scores dropping, especially for Black students across the district by incredible levels. I mean, we look at just high school math scores for Black students in the 11th grade at Edina Senior High School. They were 31% proficiency, which is not great when this new program started. But they're 14.6% now in 2017. More than double. It's dropped. And for the same group, Black students 10th grade. In reading, scores dropped from 51.7% proficiency to 40% in 2017. Is this worth it? I mean, honestly, is this worth it to the social justice warriors that now can go home? They probably don't have kids at that school. I mean, I don't know who put this in place, but they can go home. It's an exercise in self-congratulations. They can pat themselves in the back. And what they're doing is they're screwing the kids that they're purporting to help.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, and that's something that I would love to use as a springboard here for the last little bit that I put some research in on for this as well, and that is you can see roots of this not only in America, but what is going on currently over in Europe. And if the listener has not had an opportunity to examine what is going on in the Scandinavian nations, as it relates to Muslim immigrants that have fled areas such as Syria and Iraq, that have, and I'll use the word invade because that's essentially what it is. It's an invasion into these countries, and these countries and their governments have been shamed by the international community into taking these refugees in, not only letting them in, but then the result of that. And I know that we've talked a little bit about this on side conversations here over the last couple of days, Mike. But what I think is so important is, what happens from that point, the assimilation into the culture there. Scandinavian culture is in some ways, in threat. It's being threatened right now. You look at a city like Oslo, and I read multiple accounts on this. And for any listener out there who would love the information, I'd be more than happy to share my sources with you. I took time to read Scandinavian newspapers, various different accounts of what cities like Oslo are turning into. They're being
And real quick, Justin, let me just clarify the point, just so that nobody takes your words out of context. The equation that you are not making here is like some sort of invasion into white culture, or that Black people need to assimilate to white culture. That is not at all what Justin's saying. What he's saying is that this is happening, and it's continuing to happen because of a silence in the conversation, right? Nobody is allowed to say anything about it. You're not allowed to, it's one of these kind of third rails, like talking about race in this country, that you're not allowed to touch. And if you do say something, like if somebody in Scandinavia were to say something like, hey, listen, our culture is kind of at risk here, you're called exactly the exact same things, right? Neo-Nazi, white supremacist, so on and so forth. So I just wanted to, sorry to jump in, but I just wanted to make that clear as you were going.
No, absolutely. No, and that's correct. That's exactly what I'm talking about. And to give you a specific example of what I heard and saw a lot in what I prepped for is, these countries were very progressive countries in terms of human rights, in particular with the LGBTQ community and things of that nature. And if you know much about Islam, right, it's not very pro-friendly to gays. And so there were many, many instances of harassment and physical abuse and punishment by these groups that were coming in. And people were like shaking their head going, well, why can't we speak out against this? This clearly isn't right. But there was this kind of, you will be quiet and comply. And it's how rude of you to try to tell them that, oh, this is our culture and you got to change and adapt when you come here. We are the ones that have to change and adapt. We are the ones that have to, allow these mosques to be built up everywhere. We have to allow the use of burqas and other gear and things of that nature in our schools. And, you just constantly are caving in. And then little by little, the culture just erodes. And people were just simply wanting to have conversations. They were simply wanting to say, how can we take the refugees that are coming into our country and help them fit in with what we have to offer? There had to be a reason why they were attracted to want to come here. Now, you couldn't say, well, clearly they were just fleeing for their life. They probably didn't care where they landed. But there's a lot of space in between Syria, Iraq, and these Scandinavian countries. But they chose to go there for a reason. And so I think that's a perfect example there of the impact that can be seen when there is, as you were kind of pointing out there, a lack of dialogue and a lack of serious understanding about what it means to preserve a culture. It's not in any way, shape, or form, when you say, I want to preserve my culture, a statement of supremacy. That's not, I don't understand how you could even interpret it that way. To say that I want to preserve my way of life is not me saying that the way that I'm living is necessarily more superior than how you live. It's just how I choose to live my life. And I choose to live it this way for a reason. I might think it's the best way. That's different than making a claim that it is the best way, right? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And so for me to say, like, okay, listen, this is what the people in my neighborhood, my town, my community, my church, my schools, my whatever, this is how we do things. We do it this way for a reason. And if you're intrigued by that and you want to come into the community, we're open to having you in. And maybe we will be open to taking what you bring to the table. But to allow somebody to come in and just say, well, I'm setting up shop now and we're getting rid of, all the things that you've done to build your community up. And by God, you're not going to say anything about it. You're going to sit back and take it. That's wrong. That's wrong. And to be shamed and guilted into keeping your mouth shut because you're not tolerant and you don't care about other people and you're, all these names that get bantered around, it goes right back to the article, right? And the instrument that gets used for doing that is government. And we hear it all the time from advocacy groups and legislators about how intolerant certain groups are in society and how we're not open to being open-minded to multiculturalism and things of that nature. And it really is infuriating, especially when you see the examples of what's going on in many of these Scandinavian cities today.
I'd like to be able to have a conversation, just a normal conversation with somebody who disagrees with me vehemently, but without any name calling. I mean, that would be refreshing. And I almost feel like, look, you're on social media way more than I am. You probably see this all the time, where if somebody takes a particular position, they're just berated into being the worst possible thing in the world, like a white supremacist. I mean, it just shuts down dialogue immediately.
Yeah, and then we wonder why people, they kind of, ossify in their position, and that's what I was going back to what I was saying earlier is with the curriculum in Edina, when you do things like that and you force it on through the arm of government onto people, that's not gonna cause somebody to like, oh, clear eyes now. Thank goodness that the government instituted this curriculum through their schools, because up until now, I was living as a racist and I thought that the way that I was living my life was the best way to live it. And so thank goodness for this legislation. Thank goodness for this curriculum. Thank goodness for, the long arm of government setting me straight. No, when that kind of thing happens, 9 times out of 10, people are going to recoil. They're gonna close down. They're gonna shut down, and they're gonna get desperate. They're gonna start to cling more to their beliefs. They're gonna become more radical, and it's the fight or flight thing. You're gonna back them into a corner until they come out and have to fight for what they want, instead of, like you said, being able to have dialogue and talk. Okay, why are we doing this? What is the goal of doing this? What are we trying to accomplish here? What does it look like if we institute some of your culture norms and things of that nature in our culture and norms? It'd be no different than if I traveled to a foreign country and set up shop. I wouldn't expect to say, hey, this is how we did it back in Indiana in the United States. You guys better adapt right now. I'm telling you, we clearly wouldn't expect that. It wouldn't be beneficial to any of the parties involved.
Good. Good point. I think that's a pretty good job. I think we can wrap it up there on the other side. Anything else you want to add?
No, I just hope that, what we've said here in this episode encourages people to think more about this and not react so emotionally. It's a very emotional subject. I get that. I understand it. Emotions can run high when thinking about these topics, but I just encourage you to take a deep breath and do some research and read and get more rooted in an understanding of what this really truly means, in the way that we attempted to present it, not saying that we did it perfectly, but in the way that we attempted to present it this evening. And I hope that would encourage somebody to examine their belief system and what they think in regards to this topic.
Yeah, good. That's a good point. And I want to close by kind of reiterating that. You said the way that we tried to present it, and it isn't perfect, but I think by and large, what we're trying to say is the way that it's going right now, it's not helpful. I mean, and like I say, I think people just want to get along. I think everybody wants to be done with this and just get along naturally, like they did after Hurricane Harvey, when, something like that hits and you throw everything out the window immediately and you just do what it comes instinctive to you. And that is to help and not think about skin color. Honestly, I think that's how Americans are wired. I think that's how white Americans are wired. And I think that's how Black Americans are wired. And I think that it's only until we're told over and over and over again that that's not the case that we actually start to believe it. That's what we want to see stop. Oh, I'm exhausted, Justin, but I want to thank everybody for listening. And Like I said, next week we're going to be talking a little bit of economics. We're going to be talking about inequality next week. And I guess kind of the same thing, the obsession over inequality, the fact that some people have more than others. And why do we obsess over that? So we look forward to you joining us. And you have now heard the other side.